Hello, today is Monday, November 28th, 2022. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. On prior podcasts, we've described the ways that mobile service providers, hardware vendors, and app developers collect personal information about users and monetize it by selling it to advertisers. We only know about these practices because there have been numerous private and public investigations and regulatory actions that have revealed the extent of there's no other word for it, spying. On today's podcast, we are going to take a closer look at how or why this keeps happening. I'm joined by my pal, Kevin DiLallo, a senior partner at LB3, and the guy that keeps a close eye on these activities. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Joe, glad to be back.
Okay, why does this keep happening?
Joe, in a word, money. Personal information generates considerable revenue for companies who collect it. Google's advertising business has earned the company over $200 billion, largely because Google collects users' location information that it turns around and sells to advertisers for targeted ad placements.
And now Google's in some hot water because of those practices?
Yeah, they sure are. After a series of governmental investigations, warnings, settlement agreements, and fines, we've just learned that Google is continuing to collect mobile users' personal location data, even when users have adjusted their phone settings to disable location tracking. And it's continuing to monetize that information. Let's not forget that Google's company motto once was, "Don't be evil." I guess the company sees nothing wrong with secretly tracking its users and deceiving them into thinking they can somehow stop it from doing so.
Hey, Kevin, I read up on this case, and it seemed to me that Google didn't think they did anything wrong.
Well, I'll bet you $400 million they did.
Sorry, what?
Joe, earlier this month, news broke of a settlement between Google and the attorneys general of 40 states, in which Google agreed to pay almost $400 million to settle charges that it had deceived its users and violated their privacy by tracking them, even after they requested that it stop tracking. The settlement is the largest privacy-related settlement in history. It involves not only the Google Android mobile operating system, but also the Chrome browser, Google Maps, and other applications. The 40 states that brought these charges assembled evidence of these deceptive practices over a 6-year period and concluded that Google's deception of its customers violated several states' consumer protection laws. Not only does Google have to pay a settlement amount, but it has committed to making its location tracking practices more transparent to users and to making its disclosures more understandable. One of the most remarkable aspects of this settlement is the fact that Google had been publicly criticized just 4 years prior for the same conduct, but it doesn't seem to have learned anything from that experience. In 2018, the Associated Press and Princeton University exposed Google for tracking users' locations even after they had requested not to be tracked, and for misleading users into thinking that it would stop tracking them once they had disabled that functionality through their phone settings. That was a straight-up lie. In October, Google settled a similar case with the state of Arizona, and there are currently 4 other similar cases pending in D.C., Texas, Indiana, and Washington state. Maybe once a company gains as much market share and popularity as Google has, it no longer feels accountable to its customers or the general public.
And this isn't a Google-only issue, is it? There are a lot of questionable decisions being made by companies that people trust.
That's right. Just 2 years ago, the Federal Communications Commission launched its own investigation of major mobile services providers such as AT&T Mobility and Verizon Wireless for selling users' location data without taking appropriate measures to prevent unauthorized access to that sensitive information. As part of that action, the commission fined AT&T, Verizon Wireless, T-Mobile, and Sprint a total of $200 million for their lax handling of users' personal information. All 4 companies subsequently claimed to have discontinued their sales of location information to third parties. But in the fall of 2021, the Federal Trade Commission announced its findings that mobile internet service providers were collecting more personal information than they need to provide service to users, and more than the users themselves even realized. One of the dangers of these information gathering practices is that those in possession of user personal info sell it to data aggregators, whom no one has ever heard of because they operate under the radar. And then these unfamiliar entities turn around and sell it to even more unknown third parties, some of whom may have nefarious intentions. For example, in 2018, the Washington Post reported that both AT&T and Verizon Wireless had sold users' personal information to two data aggregators who in turn sold that information to correctional officers who used the information to spy on millions of Americans. Both AT&T and Verizon Wireless terminated their relationships with these data aggregators, but the damage had already been done.
It sounds like the government is coming at this from many sides. State attorneys general, the FTC, the FCC, heck, even the FAA has issues with the wireless carriers. But, Kevin, that's another podcast altogether.
There's no doubt the pressure is building. Just this past summer, the FCC launched a broader investigation into mobile service providers' handling, storage, and disposition of users' geolocation data. The commission hasn't yet acted on that information nor reported the results of its investigation, but we're keeping an eye on it for our listeners.
So back to Google. Do you think they'll change their ways?
Well, for what it's worth, Google has promised the state AGs that it'll clean up its act and provide an effective means for users to opt out of location tracking. But they've said that before and not followed through. Only time will tell if they mean what they say this time. Joe, the bottom line here is that while the government is aware of the problem and trying to curb these deceptive and invasive practices, the industry is slippery and many players haven't acted in good faith. Repeatedly, prominent companies say one thing but do another, casting doubt on whether consumers can or should trust them when they make representations. For individual users and the enterprise customers who are contracting for their service, the watchword is caution. We strongly encourage both individual and enterprise customers to familiarize themselves with the often perplexing array of privacy settings that can and should be deployed to protect users' personal information. There's no downside for users who tell the mobile providers and app developers that they can't access their personal information, and there is nothing to be gained from allowing them to do so.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. This is tricky. On the one hand, you want all the cool things technology can deliver, but you certainly don't want your private data used in a way you never expected or intended. If you'd like to learn more about this issue or you have other wireless needs, you can contact Kevin, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by giving us a call or dropping us an email. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.